Hey folks, welcome to Independent Authoring. I'm Virginia McLean. Today we're going to talk about independent publishing and traditional publishing, pros and cons. So let's start with traditional publishing since that's where most people do tend to start. When we look at the pros and cons of traditional publishing, let's address it as if you're getting published by the Big Five or one of their subsidiaries. Because if we talk about small publishing, then we get into a whole other can of worms. So let's talk Big Five, trad publishing, pros and cons. Pros. Someone else is going to represent you in your work in some fashion. You'll either have gotten an agent before you even started, or you'll have an editor that you'll be working with, or someone from the large publishing company is going to be in charge of promotions and marketing for your book, which means you don't have to do that yourself. That, I think, for most people is a wonderful, wonderful pro. So, woohoo, there's that. Also, some people feel more legitimate going through a Big Five publisher. They feel more confident that their book has been vetted. They feel that people will assume that they are legitimate the moment that they say, oh yeah, I have a deal with Penguin or Bantam or whatever. Third, distribution. Your books will wind up on bookshelves in physical bookstores across the nation, possibly across the world, and you don't have to deal with making it happen. That's pretty amazing too. Fourth, you get your money as an advance. Now, this is a pro and maybe also a con, but for a lot of people, getting a lump sum of money up front for their work is important. And that's understandable, especially if your income is the sole income supporting your family or any number of other circumstances. So, boom, big chunk of cash up front. That's a pro. Fifth, you have someone to discuss movie deals with other people, either your agent or your publishing house. If you've been legitimized by a large publishing house, you're far more likely to be approached by people willing to turn your book into a movie. So that's the top 5 pros for traditional publishing. Now, let's talk about the 5 cons for traditional publishing. Number 1, you have to sell your rights to someone else. If you're new to publishing, you may not understand how this works exactly. Figuring out how long you're selling your rights for and which rights you're selling is really, really important. And this is why people suggest getting an agent. But if you're selling your book to a large publishing house, you are guaranteed to be selling at least some of those rights to that publisher. This is a con because it means if at any point you and that publisher disagree about something, or you would like to change something in your series, or you suddenly decide you want to go independent, you're kind of stuck. That can be a big negative. Number 2, you probably need an agent in order to deal with the aforementioned con and some of the aforementioned pros. You need to negotiate a lump sum that you're going to receive. You need to negotiate which rights you're going to keep. And in truth, unless you're very savvy legally, chances are good it's better to hire someone else to do this. Agents are great things to have. However, agents are one more hurdle to overcome. So now if you want to become traditionally published, you need to first get an agent lined up, and second, get a book deal with a large publishing house. And if what you're writing doesn't really jive with what people think is marketable, even if it's great, you may wind up without a publisher. 3, lack of creative control. Basically, what this comes down to is that you, as an author, have absolutely no input with a big publisher as to what your cover looks like, what your formatting looks like, or even whether or not large chunks of your text actually make it into the published novel. For those of us who really like control, it can be a deal breaker. Honestly, when it came down to me choosing whether or not to go indie or trad, this was one of the biggest factors for me. For other people, it's not so much of a big deal. 4, remember that money we talked about? Remember how you were going to get an advance lump sum, and that was a pro? It is a pro for some people. You do get a big check that pays you right up front. The problem is that that check is essentially a loan. You're getting a large chunk of money on what the publisher is betting they'll make selling your book over its lifetime. So if you get a check for $50,000 at the start of your book deal, you are then slowly earning that back. You could be sitting there waiting for this book to actually pay back the publishers for years. And in the meantime, you're making absolutely no more money on it than that initial check. 5. Royalties. Remember that lump sum we just talked about? The way you earn that back is through a very small percentage of each book sale. What that percentage is varies from author to author and the deal that the aforementioned agent has made for you. But chances are good, if you're a first-time author, that number will be pretty small. Authors like Stephen King and John Green and other big names only get about 23% off of each book sold. When you're just starting out, chances are good that that number will be much closer to 12%. Which brings us over to independent authoring pros. Thanks for joining us for part 1 of Indie versus Trad Publishing pros and cons. Next up, we'll be talking indie pros and cons. And as that's what I have the most experience with, you'll notice that that video is quite a bit longer than this one. Anyway, go ahead and click the button that you see showing you part 2.